Hello and welcome everybody to the latest edition of NEWIEE's Ask Me Anything webinar series. My name is Paulina Swartz and I'm a member of NEWIEE's board of directors. I'm honored to be moderating today's conversation with Amy Duffuor. Today's Ask Me Anything webinar is one in a series of conversations that NEWIEE has with incredible female leaders from the energy and environmental fields. These events occur actually regularly on the second Wednesday of the month. So if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, please head out to NEWIEE.org to do so, and also keep an eye on our calendar and social media channels for future speaker announcements. On behalf of NEWIEE, I also wanted to extend a very warm welcome, very warm thank you to our annual event sponsors whose support makes NEWIEE's virtual programs possible. As you can see, they are Eversource, First Light, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and Robinson & Cole. And there's a little white left on this page, so I think we could fit a few more logos here. If your organization is interested in supporting NEWIEE, please get in touch with us. NEWIEE launched this Ask Me Anything series as a way to keep our community connected during this difficult time, and also to give our community members a chance to get to learn from amazing women in our fields, and also to get a chance to ask questions from them about their career paths, their areas of expertise, and so forth. So we want to make this event very conversational and informal, and you can do that by asking a lot of questions. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so anytime you can go in there and ask your question, and note that you can even ask your question on an anonymous basis. And we have another Ask Me Anything session already scheduled on September 9th. We'll have Linda George from Rhode Island Division of Public Utilities and Carriers participating with us. So please be sure to sign up for that at NEWIEE.org. So to get us started today, I'm going to introduce Amy first and ask her to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll head to audience questions. We have a great turnout today, so hopefully we'll get to your questions as soon as possible. Amy Duffuor is a principal at Prime Impact Fund. Prime is an early stage venture capital fund that invests in transformative technology companies that have the potential to create gigaton scale climate impacts. At Prime, Amy identifies and evaluates investment opportunities. She leads investments and serves on the boards of portfolio companies. Amy has a unique and diverse professional background. Prior to her role at Prime, she was an investment banker on Wall Street and worked for an impact investing firm in Singapore. Her past clients have included renewable energy companies, utilities, and even a micro hydro project in Indonesia, which gave her an opportunity to ride through rivers and up mountains in the back of a pickup truck. Amy has worked with a range of companies, including startups at the incubation stage, and even one that reached a near $1 billion valuation when it went public. Amy has an undergraduate degree from Columbia University, an MPhil degree from the University of Oxford in England, and an MBA from the Wharton School. With that, welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Paulina, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I think what NEWIEE's doing is incredible, and really, I'm an open book, so feel free to ask me anything.
Great. We're thrilled to have you. And to get started, I wanted to ask a little bit about your work at Prime. Prime is such an interesting organization. And for the benefit of our viewers who may not be familiar with Prime, you invest in early stage companies that are creating climate benefits, but how are you different or the same as other venture capital firms that are doing the same kind of investing?
No, that's a great question. So as you gave that really helpful introduction, I'm a principal at Prime Impact Fund, and Prime Impact Fund invests in early stage transformative technology companies with potential for gigaton scale climate impact. And so the place that Prime plays within the broader venture space is quite unique. And it really starts with our founding and our journey as being an initiative of Prime Coalition, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. So Prime Coalition was started in 2014, really with the mission to partner with philanthropists and place catalytic capital into climate companies. And so why focus on philanthropists? Essentially at that time, you know, early stage, so I'm saying pre-seed, seed, Series A companies that were primarily hardware-based, kind of in the climate space, were receiving almost zero venture dollars. They're much more capital intensive. They require a longer investing horizon. And the executive director at Prime Coalition, Sarah Carney, thought, okay, everyone's harping on why, you know, venture isn't putting money into these extremely important breakthrough climate innovations, but we should look at the philanthropy sector, because there were $600 billion in US family foundations alone, and really channel that capital into climate tech companies. And so the unique place that Prime plays kind of within this broader VC ecosystem is not necessarily the way that we work with companies, because that's similar to a traditional venture fund in that we're hands-on partners, but the capital that's coming into the fund is all catalytic capital. So for us, that means, you know, recoverable grants, program-related investments, which are typically used by foundations, and mission-related investments, which are equity subscriptions. And so we want to use that inherently patient and flexible capital to de-risk early-stage climate technologies for follow-on investors. So I would say one thing that's unique about us is the color of capital we use and the types of companies that we're able to support. Oftentimes that means we can go earlier than others because we have this inherently patient and flexible capital. So we're not shy about going into university labs. You know, another kind of way that makes sense is that because we care about climate impact, and for us, when I said transformative, I really do mean transformative. Gigaton scale is a pretty big amount. And we recognize that there are a lot of companies in the broader environment and climate space that are working on more incremental improvements, which we think is completely worthwhile, but we're really focused on gigaton scale. And so I think that quite high impact bar, coupled with the capital that's coming into our fund, and the fact that we tend to focus on companies where our capital can really be additional. So Prime's capital, you know, is necessary to catalyze around, either because we're going earlier than others, because we can prioritize climate impact, because, you know, we're able to focus on a category or a sector which typically hasn't seen a lot of venture, you know, activity. I think those are all things that really differentiate us from other venture funds.
That's great. I heard the word gigaton, and so can you put that into perspective? If you look at global emissions on an annual basis, what's the range, and how does your goal relate to that range?
Sure. So, you know, from the really where that's come from is the IPCC to get to that sort of warming potential of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. You know, we need to take 70 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions out of the air. Half of that is expected to come from existing technologies. The other half will really need to come from new breakthrough technologies. When I think about placing kind of gigaton scale climate impact into something that's more concrete, you know, all onshore wind in the United States is give or take roughly about 1 to 1.5 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions reduction per year. And so we're asking pretty early stage companies to have the potential for gigaton scale climate impact once they reach scale.
Interesting. And what I really find interesting about you, there's a lot of stuff that we'll see what our audience members are interested in, but you've done interesting things. You've worked outside the US. You actually didn't start in investments or finance. You have an interesting start to your career. I noticed that you even have a degree in migration studies, I think. And so talk to me about I guess the word is evolution of your career goals, and how that early exposure to non-investments and kind of other topics affects your work at Prime.
No, it's a great question because my career has been very much like this. So sometimes, you know, it's not linear as many people's aren't. So it's good to be able to make the connections. So you're right. I started out my career as an immigration researcher. I was really passionate about really thinking through how, at the time, West African immigrants, primarily in the US and the UK, were integrating into their host country. So whether that was becoming civically engaged or, you know, other kind of forms of participation, that's really what I was focused on, was those marginalized kind of migrants from that part of West Africa. And that's the reason I went to Oxford to get an MPhil in migration studies. I think along the way, I learned that because eventually I had gotten into their PhD program, that for me, the work was extremely meaningful, but at the time it wasn't practical. I was, you know, in an institution that cared a lot about producing knowledge, and I was studying marginalized West African migrants, you know, in these geographies to enact change. And so, you know, after that, I thought, okay, what's the most, you know, practical thing I can think of? And I wasn't very creative. I went into management consulting. So after, you know, I left my MPhil, did a stint at a UK-based management consulting firm that specialized in supply chain and procurement. And so really getting into the kind of ops heavy sides of businesses. And while I was there, still working in the UK, I got placed on a project in Singapore at Barclays Investment Bank, where I wasn't a banker, but I sourced law firms and legal providers. And I had this moment in 2013 where I thought, wow, I've now been working in consulting for 3 or so years, and this is nothing to do with my original start, which was very social justice oriented in terms of immigration research. And I started to think about, how can I marry the business acumen that I've gained with my passion for social and environmental impact? And that's when I came across impact investing. You know, it seemed like such a no-brainer at the time to make investments into companies that could generate positive social or environmental impact. And that, alongside with the fact I fell in love with Asia, and I didn't expect that, you know, made me consider, okay, let's see what impact investing opportunities are present in Singapore and around Southeast Asia. And so that's when I transitioned to an impact investing firm called IIX, which was scaling Asian social ventures. And there, I was there for a couple of years running their early stage social venture accelerator programs around Southeast Asia. So doing everything from sourcing to due diligence, kind of running training workshops and investor pitch days. And it was all sector agnostic. So I did clean energy deals and healthcare and education and, you know, fintech. What I did realize is, while I love the impact investing space, I was really focusing more on the operational side, and I wanted to move to the investing side, which is very difficult to do if you don't have a hard finance background. So I tried, and I was getting mainly operations roles in the broader impact space. So, you know, that's when I decided to go to business school. Came back to the US after 7 or 8 years abroad, went to Wharton, which is a finance school, finished that. I'm also from the Philadelphia area, so it was nice to be able to see my family after eight long years abroad. And then after that, kind of went into renewables investment banking, because I wanted to have the opportunity to help mature companies scale and raise capital, and not just very early stage companies. Kind of along that journey, and I know this is quite long-winded, is I really started to focus a lot more on climate. I started thinking, climate change impacts everything that we do. It impacts what we eat. It impacts who moves. Actually, that's the connection to migration studies. It impacts our health. It impacts how we learn. It's such an intersectional problem and crisis. And given, you know, my not only intersectional identity, but kind of the intersectional nature of the things that I had studied, I felt at the time that there was that approach was, you know, either missing or not being highlighted as much. And for me, I really thought, okay, look, I want to focus on climate change. I want to make investments into climate companies. For me, particularly because I'm drawn to the fact that the climate crisis disproportionately impacts low-income communities, communities of color, particularly in the global South. And, you know, that really became my rallying cry to make the transition. And then I was lucky enough to find the Prime team.
Wow, it's a fantastic story. And my guess is that's not uncommon in terms of how people come to impact investing. That kind of a journey where you don't want to leave what matters to you at the door and kind of have a job without have some meaning and values embedded into it, even if it's something like investing. That's wonderful. What's it like for you? What can I ask? I mean, maybe a little bit of a personal question, but what has it been like for you to witness the last 6 months? I mean, we're going through so many challenges. We're really not even talking about climate a lot, though of course, climate change and air pollution is related to COVID-19, but talk to me about what it's been like to see the country go through the pandemic and all the protests for greater racial equality, considering the work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. It was challenging. I mean, you're already isolated from friends and family because of the pandemic, and you know the way that so many people got really sick and passed away without any of their loved ones around really broke my heart. The levels of kind of the disproportionate impacts to Black and Brown communities, which, as you mentioned, live in areas which have higher rates of air pollution and all sorts of other things. It just reinforced a lot of this interconnectedness. And then I think with the protests around racial injustice, which really started focusing on the criminal justice system, but I think quickly kind of reverberated to systemic racism across a number of industries, venture capital being one of them. It's not a very diverse industry at all. I think it really, at one hand, it was kind of sad given the fact that we were so isolated and you couldn't, as much as you would have liked, go into your normal communities, although the protests were an example of that. But it also gave me hope because I felt as though people were starting to wake up to a lot of the intersectional nature of these issues and the way that they impact people. All will impact everyone, but there are disproportionate impacts that are felt by some more so than others. And for me at Prime, I think it just reignited the passion that I had for trying to find companies that were addressing things in an intersectional way, or bringing attention and calling attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, not only within our own organization, but in kind of the broader, venture industry, and also kind of the philanthropy space as well, and climate space, climate tech and clean tech space. And it just all started to kind of fit together. It felt like it was fitting together in terms of a kind of a puzzle, a puzzle that had been taken way too long to figure it out.
You think it'll be easier? I mean, venture capital and who gets funded and who works in the startups, we've known about the lack of diversity and other issues like that. But do you think those challenges will be easier to work on, given what we've gone through in the last 6 months? And how are you guys allowed to think about not just the climate, but the social aspects of climate when you're making investments?
Yeah, two good questions. So I think they're separate questions. I'll take the first one. I think the industry, people want change, and I hope that this is a moment where there's gonna be actual change, not just statements that have come out that are in support of something, which is great, and I think people appreciate that, but also having metrics or concrete initiatives that back up the work that you as an organization are ready to do. And truth be told, at Prime we're just beginning the journey, and we're very humble. We gotten some things right. We're women led, which I think is wonderful. Even our investment team and our leadership team is predominantly women. There are other areas that we need to get better at, whether it's race and ethnicity, or sexual orientation, or people not all coming from the same crop of elite schools. There's more work that definitely needs to be done. And I think as long as organizations are truly willing to put in the work, and also just get a little uncomfortable, because this type of work is not meant to be just a checkbox exercise. You have to get a little uncomfortable. You have to dig deep and kind of figure out where are the areas that you want to change. And I hope that the broader venture capital industry is taking note, And I've seen some really positive starts. I mean, even in the New England area, which actually had started prior to the pandemic, there's an initiative being organized by a gentleman named Kerry Bowie called Browning the Green Space, which I think is great. It's got a broad coalition of people, not only from venture, from government, from startups, from developers, like renewable energy developers. It's a really broad coalition, which I think is great when we start to think about really kind of diversifying the environmental space. So that's the first question, answer to your first question. And then the second question, which was around
like social, when you mean the climate, and you're
so
going after this breakthrough ideas, which, the climate is such a huge, and I've seen these schools of thought. Some people say we just have to focus on climate and everything else is not as important. And then some people say, no, we have to solve multiple problems at the same time. We don't have the time or the whatever. So how do you consider social impact when you look at investments at Prime? Or do you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There we go. So first and foremost, I mean, when we look at our investment criteria, our North Star is, gigaton scale of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So I don't want to portray that is not that's not the key thing that we care about, and that's really the screen that we have. However, we do ask, companies that go through our investment advisory committee to talk about their additional social impacts. And I think it's something that we've been focusing more on, especially kind of understanding how so many of these things are related. I think it probably plays out differently for different people. So for example, I really love people. I think it's one of the reasons I've been really focusing a lot on the agriculture space at Prime. So I made our first ag tech investment into a company called Clean Crop Technologies. And what they're doing is they've developed a high voltage atmospheric cold plasma that can generate reactive gas species. So think of a reactor, you press a button and things initially from air, similar to a cocktail, and it can degrade various pathogens, toxins, and pests responsible for food waste. So their initial market is going to be aflatoxin, which is a huge issue in peanuts. Anywhere from 40 to 60%, particularly in developing countries, of the peanut crop could be ruined by aflatoxin. And if you are in South Africa and you have, a high amount of food insecurity, you're going to eat that contaminated aflatoxin because you have no other choice of things to eat. So it's been linked with poisoning in expectant mothers and young children. And so I think, for me to be the first investment that I've led at Prime and that I'm sitting on the board of, one that not only kind of marries the gigaton scale greenhouse gas emissions reduction, given it's a crop loss and food waste play, but also that it has these very real human health impacts, was one of the things that drew me to the company. And frankly, the founders of the company have a lot of experience, not only working in developed, but also developing countries. And I think that's also extremely important. And the fact that they're focusing on a global solution because, climate change is a global problem.
That's wonderful. And so when I listen to you, you play, is the stage that you play on a global stage? You'll go and find ideas, technologies, companies anywhere, regardless of where the applicability of the technology is or where the team is based?
Right now I'm at Prime, we are primarily US focused. So that means the company needs to be headquartered or have most of its operations in the United States. Their customers or, markets can be outside. Many of the companies in our portfolio have, global plans and global aspirations. Actually, the first company that we invested in, Lilac Solutions, it's a lithium extraction startup, they are playing a lot in, South America, because that's where a lot of the brine ponds are, like in Chile, for example. So, for our current fund, it really does need to have kind of US focus and operations. We'll consider it in an extreme, case. And that's also partly just logistics. We can be better partners to a founder if they are, a 5-hour flight away instead of a 15-hour flight. And so particularly as we are trying to pioneer this new model within the climate space, working with founders that are much closer to us is it just logistically makes more sense. You know, if we have raised subsequent vehicles, that may be something that, you know, we'll want to take a look at in terms of, you know, adjusting or changing.
Great. So taking a couple of questions from our audience. The first question is, where are you in the funding cycle? And I assume this refers to at what stage of the company do you engage in?
Yep, no, great question. And we are pretty flexible. So we invest in pre-seed, seed, and Series A rounds. We have had people come to us with honestly just a concept and, you know, to start talking through it, then they've gone into the lab, you know, started to, you know, put some meat around the bones, and then have engaged us for a pre-seed round. So, you know, before the company was even incorporated, but they had, you know, a promising new piece of technology that had a, you know, a big entitlement or big swing within a particular climate wedge, and we wanted to fund them at these early stages. We've had people come to us who have prototypes, you know, put together, but they really need capital to help them scale to either increase their throughput or, you know, reach pilot scale or you know, ultimately, you know, commercial scale. And so it really runs the gamut. I would say that there's never anyone too early to come and start talking to us. We really view working with companies as hands-on partners. It's like, you know, in some ways it's like a marriage in VC. And so getting to know someone early is a sign of starting to build that trust in a relationship, which is needed given, you know, these relationships are generally quite long-term.
So that's sort of a great segue to the next question, which is how involved are the investors once they make the investment with respect to the stage?
You know, we're very, very involved. I mean, it's critically important to us to, one, make sure that we can be as helpful as possible in supporting these, you know, visionary entrepreneurs to achieve their goals, but also we care about climate impact. And so if we're not being hands-on partners to help you, you know, think through some of the pain points in your business that can ultimately help you achieve that gigaton scale climate impact, you know, we're not doing our job. You know, that said, we invested in 8 companies, you know, to date. We're envisioning probably a 15 company portfolio. And we generally don't like to do it alone because we believe strong syndicates when we're investing are really important. You know, it's very rare that one investor has all of the things that you need to help you get to the next level if you're an entrepreneur. So putting together syndicates that are quite complementary to our skill set at Prime is really, really important. And that's something that we've done with 6 or 7 out of the 8 investments that we've done. We've, you know, it's only been 1 or so that's alone.
So we had a question about that. You read my mind. I was about to ask, have you ever been a sole investor and under what conditions?
We have been a sole investor, and to date, those have been under pre-seed. Because if our, you know, just for everyone's knowledge, we typically invest at Prime, you know, $3 to $4 million in total per company. Think about that, you know, across all subsequent financing. So half of that is generally initially invested up front, and then we reserve the other half for follow-on. If you are, you know, a pre-seed investment and you're looking for, I'm just throwing this number out there, 500K or 200K, like it's much easier to do, you know, that amount, you know, all by ourselves versus if you're raising a $5 million Series seed. So, you know, part of that is just with regards to the round size.
Makes sense. So let's switch a little bit gears. Charles is asking a more career question. How did you find Prime? Was it through an event, through personal networking? How did the opportunity come about?
Yeah, this is like a very, very good question. Somewhat fortuitously. So I think networking is really important. So many, whether this is good or bad, actually, I think it's probably not good. Many of the roles in venture are referral based. They're not posting, you know, job descriptions, which ultimately means they go to the same, you know, they're passed within the same networks. I found Prime because one of my friends from business school was, before business school, was a senior director of partnerships at Greentown Labs. And, you know, I was talking to her, you know, when I was in at Bank of America when I was doing renewables investment banking, and I was talking to her about this climate, this climate crisis and what I'm being called to do. Frankly, at that time, I wasn't looking to make a transition. I had just finished a large IPO for, the residential solar company that you mentioned, Sunnova. It was such a privilege for me to travel around the world with the CEO, John Berger, who built that business from scratch. I was there when they rang the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. It was, I can't underscore how special it is to be able to see an entrepreneur's dream of going public become a reality. And at that time, I wasn't, out here looking for something new. And she said, yeah, I know you said you talk about climate change and ultimately you want to go back into investing. I know that there's this new fund that's starting with really, really smart people, and they're trying to approach it from a different way. I think you should just have a call and see if what they're doing is interesting. Maybe not now, but down the line. And I said, okay, that makes sense. Second question for me was, where is it located? I originally from Philly, spent time in New York and London and Singapore. I had never spent time in New England. In fact, our offices are in Cambridge, and the first time I ever went to Cambridge was for my interview. So I was just not familiar with this area, and I didn't have as many networks here. And so my next thought was like, okay, New England, I've never spent a lot of time there. Like, do I want to move there? But okay, let me just have this call. And it was really fortuitous. I really clicked with the people on the team. I loved the vision. I thought it was a really, really interesting approach to this persistent existential threat. And, I've moved here to the Boston area, and I'm learning to love it. So
great. Are you planning on becoming a Celtics fan?
I don't know. I'm a Sixers girl, Allen Iverson, the one forever. And also, a staunch Eagles fan. I was not into any of the Patriots stuff. So I think Philly and Boston are actually pretty similar in the sense that as cities, large student populations, quite working class roots, also, very, Americana roots too. So for a place that seemed so different to me or so foreign, because I hadn't spent any time really in the Boston area, when I finally got there, I was like, oh, okay, no, this is actually very similar to parts of Philadelphia where I spent time growing up.
Yeah, I also was an Allen Iverson fan, so.
Great.
Yep. Well, we're here for you if you do change your mind. I know it's a all-time rivalry between our two cities. So let's switch back to Prime, and this is a great question. From Becca, does Prime rely on GINN or IRIS or other social impact metrics when investing? If not, what metrics are you using?
Yeah, that's great. So the GIN and IRIS metrics are super helpful, particularly because they, with IRIS, that wide taxonomy of, any social impact that you're looking at, they give you 1 million metrics that you can use to start tracking your business. At Prime, we've actually sort of pioneered our own methodology, and it really came from research that Sarah Carney, the executive director of Prime Coalition, did in conjunction with NYSE, the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency in 2017. And that was really around an emissions reduction potential calculation for climate technology. So it's a forward-looking statement. I'll think about financial statements. Instead of actuals, you've got forward-looking statements. And really it will look at different technologies, their ability to displace current ones, also the ability of new technologies to come in and displace them. And then based on that and a number of other parameters, it could be the deployment year, it could be, market, penetration. It will come up with a greenhouse gas emissions reduction, per year. And for us, because we care about from now until 2050, that's the time period that we look at. But that ERP, calculation, that research was done in 2017. It informs every single investment that we make. We have a consultant that has been working with us for years who has a lot of deep expertise in this space, and they conduct an ERP for every single investment we want to do. So, and it's independent and separate, and that's for a reason, because as a member of the investment team, if I really love a company, I love the team, I think they've got an awesome go-to-market strategy, they've already, their unit economics look good, and we do an ERP and they don't they don't pass our gigaton or half gigaton scale thresholds, we can't make an investment in them. And I can't fudge the numbers. And that's why we've got somebody who's independent who's doing that. And so that's a really important impact measurement tool that we use. We also think it shouldn't just, live within Prime. So we do a very deep dive version with each of the investments we're about to make. But we have an open source tool called Crane. It stands for Carbon Reduction Assessment for New Enterprises. It's cranetool.org. You can go in there, put in the sector or the climate technology you want to look at, solar, X, Y, and Z, put in a bunch of parameters and it will spit out a report and a forward-looking ERP. It's this first version that we've introduced is lighter in terms of what we would do at Prime, primarily because so many things can be customized. But I think it's a great starting point, not only for startups who want to be able to measure their environmental impacts as when they're speaking to partners or investors, but also investors as kind of a first step in evaluating potential climate impacts of a company that they're looking at.
I imagine angel groups would be interested in something like that. It's not a tool that they could develop necessarily. They wouldn't have the capacity, the resources to develop it, but to be able to kind of
absolutely
use what you've come up with is wonderful. Do you rerun that analysis on a regular basis, or how do you kind of? Because I imagine the early estimates and assumptions are pretty rough.
Yeah, no, great question. So there are two ways that we sort of measure climate impact. One is that we have climate impact milestones that every single one of our portfolio companies, fills out, once we've made an investment into them, and it will track them, on the operations, like on the products or services deployed, and how that translates into GHG emissions reductions. And we'll revisit that every 6 months. Because many times the climate impact is embedded into operations, and these are very early stage companies. It's really about the operational milestones. But what I think you're really getting at is we do a portfolio-wide impact audit every 5 years. We're actually going through it right now, whereby not only do we kind of at a portfolio level look, are we achieving the impact that we claim to make? But we have an independent consultant that's come in and is even kind of doing a deep dive into all of our sort of impact measurement practices and reporting to make sure that, we are at the top of our game. We want to make sure that, research and things that we put out 3 or 4 years ago are still relevant. And if things need to be tweaked or updated or changed, those consultants are really, really helpful data points so we can, make sure that we maintain that very high and rigorous bar of climate impact.
I love the sound of the rigor and the independence. That's you're setting very high bars on multiple fronts. It's wonderful to hear. So let's switch back to kind of career type question. Natasha is asking about your network and how you built it, your network and career abroad. And do you have any general tips for others who would like to do that? To
work abroad.
And build network. And I mean, did you end up abroad because you went to school abroad, or did you, so how do you, not that I can imagine why would people want to leave the United States right now, but actually I have a foreign passport and I can't even go anywhere, but let's not get into that. But so
stuck with us.
How do you what do you recommend people do if they're interested in exploring working in Asia, working in Europe?
Yeah, so great question. I will say that going to school was an easier at the time foray into international experience. At the UK, they've done away with this now. I mean, I was there in school when the UK was still part of the EU. They used to have like a post-study work visa where you could work anywhere for 2 or 3 years, either in the UK or across the European Union. And those were really critical years where you could start to build networks and demonstrate your value to companies such that they would be able to sponsor you afterwards. I think now, if you want to move and you don't, your financial situation is such that you need to move with a job or a role, consider looking at large companies that have offices that are abroad. I think that's the easiest way, is if you can transfer, or look at some of the large, you know, energy companies that have offices. Maybe they're headquartered in, you know, think about Iberdrola, like headquartered in Spain, but they've got an office in the US, that you could start in the US office and then, you know, make the transition to headquarter elsewhere. You know, if you have more financial kind of flexibility or cushion, you know, and we're not in a pandemic where they're restricting movement of people, you could always go somewhere and then just start to network, either by using meetup groups, aligning yourselves with universities, particularly if you're interested in things with more of a, like a science or engineering type bent. There are a lot of, you know, venture philanthropy groups in various countries around the world. I think that's a pretty good place to start. So like if you were in Singapore, for example, there's the Asia Venture Philanthropy Group, which is headquartered there. Great place to go, get a sense of all the players in terms of the funds, the family offices, start going to those events and networking. I think also, you know, makes a lot of sense. And then surprisingly, I mean, I think LinkedIn is a really good way to chat with people. I think it's now being used quite a lot more, but, you know, 4, 5, 6 years ago, like reaching out to somebody and having an actual thoughtful message that doesn't look contrived. You literally looked at them, you've seen whatever the overlap is in terms of your background, and ask to have a call, or if you're in the same location, you know, a coffee chat. I would be like, that really, really did wonders. And so just not being afraid to reach out to people, and also doing the legwork by doing a lot of research and figuring out who are the key players in the space, and then identifying based on that, who are the staff or the team members at those organizations that you think you would have the best likelihood of, you know, having something in common with, or something that would be appealing to them, such that you can reach out.
Thanks for that. So let's go back to Prime. How do you connect with startups? I noticed you have a form on your website so that somebody could just fill it out, but what are the best ways to get in touch with you if somebody has a technology that they want to ask you to invest in?
Yeah, so our website is definitely the kind of the first touch point. We meet startups in tons of different ways. When we were able to travel, or when travel was much more frequent, you know, there are tons of startup events, either ones that are maybe linked to NREL, you know, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or different accelerators and incubators around the country, or different universities. So we were traveling quite a lot at Prime, or I'll speak for myself, I was traveling quite a lot at Prime, you know, running around the country meeting startups. You know, we do get a fair amount of startups through referrals. So once you've got, you know, good relationships with people, people will send you, you know, companies. The key to that, and kind of harking back to what I started with at the top of this conversation, was, you know, VC gets a bad rap because it's very insular, which it is. And so if you're getting referrals, you can't be getting referrals from the same like 3 or 4 people that have the same, you know, archetype. You need to make sure that you are being extremely broad. You're going to lots of different types of universities, people that are not only, you know, founding companies and living on the coast, you know, California, you know, Massachusetts, New York, et cetera, like getting outside of the usual centers, talking to pipeline partners who are focused in areas that you as an organization, you know, may not have as many inroads in. So, you know, I don't think referrals are bad. I generally think investors are lazy and they don't want to broaden their network to make sure that they have a wide kind of swath of referrals. And then the application on our website that, you know, that was mentioned is also, it's a really great place. So we screen so many companies, you know, a year. I think we've got over 3,000. Like, we will look at over, you know, 3,000. It's quite a lot. I would say 80 to 90% of them probably drop out because they don't meet our very high climate bar. But in terms of the way that our investment team works, you know, we've got 3 of us who are on the leadership team, myself and 2 other partners, and then we have, you know, 2 of our associates who manage and lead our investment pipeline. So they're actually going through every single one of those applications that come through on our website. It's not a black hole. And, you know, based on that, you know, they will get in touch with people who, you know, appears to be a good fit for Prime for a first round pitch / call. So, you know, yes, if you have an interesting or compelling idea, like, please, you know, submit something through the application, and like rest assured somebody will look at it. And I will also say that even when we look at things, say we deem that it's not the right fit for us now, if something materially has changed in your business, you're working on one idea and then you pivot 6 months later and it's a holy grail within the climate space, like you have figured out how to fix cement and like to decarbonize cement, like of course we would want to talk to you and hear about how your thinking has evolved. So for really smart entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs that are really committed to solving big climate problems, just because we say no at one point doesn't mean no forever. It does mean no until there's been a material change in your business, because we're not going to listen to the same thing, 3 times if it's not a good fit. But there have been plenty of people who have come back to us sort of pivoting and changing, and it's made much more sense after that period of time versus right in the beginning.
Right. Back to career type question. What were the key factors behind your decision to go to grad school both times?
Got it. Okay. So first time I was passionate about immigration research. I wanted to get a PhD. Frankly, it was the financial crisis, the first one, 2008. So there just were no jobs. Like the world was imploding and I was living in New York City and nothing made any sense. So a lot of people at that time, went to grad school. I think there are some studies that have come out, like people in that generation lost like 2 years of salary or something, when you'd come back, just because there was such a kind of a step back that was taken. So now people who have graduated are looking for jobs during the pandemic. I'm like, don't worry, you will be fine. We were able to deal with it like 12, 13, 14 years ago. So that was really the driving force behind the first one. The first stint in grad school at Oxford. The second one for the MBA, to be honest, that was primarily because I wasn't getting the roles that I wanted to get. I wouldn't have gone and got a second master's and done more schooling if I was able to make a transition to an investing role in the impact space. Business school or grad school is it's an easier way to reset, because I often think that, companies are willing to take a chance on someone in school, but they're not willing to take a chance on someone in the workforce. We can kind of debate the irony of that later. But it became clear to me after, doing a number of interviews and really not getting the types of roles that I was looking for, that having that type of career reset would be really important. And it was really intentional. I was, lucky enough to get in, but it was the reason I chose Wharton, which is a finance school. I majored in finance and entrepreneurial management, went into renewables, investment banking. Like those were all very intentional decisions to try and close a perceived gap that I felt that the market had about my skill set.
I doubt luck had anything to do with you getting in, but it's just a side note. What about somebody who doesn't have a finance background? How do you figure they could still get into impact investing? Is there a path?
Absolutely. I guess the question I would ask though is, what type of role in the impact investing space do you want? Because it's so broad. If you want an investing role, I personally don't think this is true, and I think I can speak candidly here, although I can't see everyone. A lot of people hire people in spaces based on the background that they have and what they value. So I don't think you need to have a venture or an investment banking background to work in impact investing in an investing role. It's just that many of the people that are hiring who've made career switches, because impact investing is it's not super new. It's been around, for ages, but the form that we think of it really grew out of the financial crisis. So there wasn't that organic coming up in terms of the impact investing space, I think, as younger generations have now. And so they value that. Some people think that's the only way that you can be successful in the space, which absolutely is not true. I think another area, if you want to do an investing role, is if you have an area of expertise that can be really, really, value add. If you've done deep dives into, energy storage or the carbon capture technologies, like you can really use your expertise in an area which is not, financially based, to demonstrate the value that you can add to the impact investing space if you want an investing role. If you want an impact measurement role, which is so critical, and it's one of the things I believe is really, a barrier to the space. We don't have key financial metrics, like we do in traditional finance, like take the impact side out, that make it easier for, investors to evaluate. Like that's really important. It's a completely different skill set. Like that's more like, do you have monitoring evaluation? Are you good at data, data analytics? Are you good at picking out the nuances, which I don't think you need to have, finance, background for that. There could be another element whereby you're more focused on the operational side, which is what I was doing before I had transitioned to the investing side. Can you, I did supply chain and procurement, which is like the least sexy thing ever, but it's breaking down components of businesses, figuring out how they work, figuring out how you can optimize them, and then communicating that to your client and then operationalizing it. And so, having an understanding and the way that your mind thinks in terms of that can be super helpful in the impact space. It's interesting. I mean, venture, earlier stage, there's not really that distinction, but as you start to get bigger or you have larger investments you're making either within growth equity or even towards private equity, they start to delineate the skill sets in these funds and firms. Like you've got the person who's the, operating partner, and then you've got the investment partner. So it's almost like, and you might have two different people that are helping within the same organization that's helping a company grow and scale. And I don't know whether that trend will happen within the impact investing space, if there'll be, more of a delineation of those types of skill sets and roles. But I think that's another area where you can add a ton of value. And maybe the last thing I'll say, I feel like I'm always very long-winded, is that is to say, I'm giving you like a roadmap based on my experience, which is one experience. Like I wouldn't even take no for an answer. I think it's completely, as long as you have a good story and it makes sense to you as to why the skill sets and the experiences that you've had make you a good candidate or a good fit for whatever job you want to go into. I think as long as you're able to articulate that with confidence and authenticity, that will also go a long way. I don't know anyone at the time who was like, oh, somebody who has a master's in migration studies and was an immigration researcher and worked in consulting and was like operations, running accelerators and a banker, makes sense to be an early stage venture investor, but you make it work.
It's a great answer. And I second everything you said. I think also maybe to add one from my perspective, like you said, you don't have to have all the answers, but if you're willing to learn, and if you're really into impact investing or whatever subsector of it that you're pursuing, there's much to be said about, interest, enthusiasm, and just willingness to, do the work to learn. So that's all great piece of advice.
Absolutely.
Now we have a ton of questions. We have so many questions that we haven't gone through. So do you have any dinner plans? I don't know. We could go for a couple hours, but we're out of our time pretty much, because we want to make sure we leave a little more time to ask you this question that we ask every one of our Ask Me Anything guests, and that is, we ask people to conclude with any career advice that they have received that has really resonated with you. So what advice have you gotten that you'd love to share with us about career that's worked for you well?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I was thinking about this, and I think people say this, but I mean it, probably taking a step back and being a little bit more abstract, but leaning into your strengths and not thinking strengths of like, oh, I'm good with numbers, so I should, and Excel, so I should, work in private equity where I'm in spreadsheets all day, but just taking a step back and really thinking about what your strengths are and how that can be applied in different situations. Sometimes we are so kind of singularly focused and tactical on things that having that broader picture is hard to keep in mind. So to give you an example from my own experience, which I think will hopefully help provide, be a little bit more have a little bit more concrete around it, is one of the things that I think are my strengths is because I love people. I love talking to people. I love hearing people's stories. And I think because of the fact that I've lived in different countries and I've worked in different industries, it allows me, or I've had the opportunity, and I'm very comfortable connecting with people from very different backgrounds. So I not only, nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, et cetera. Many of the times, and the experiences that I've had, I was operating as the only person X. And so what that means is you're able to find common ground with people that is not so visible. That for me is not the first thing that I, touch on. Oh, we have this, we look the same, or oh, we went to the same school. And, I think because of that, it allows you to build trust and rapport across it's allowed me to build trust and rapport across a lot of different groups. Now that's helpful working with startups because entrepreneurs are going to look very different to you, and we're investing in really kind of broadly diverse climate technologies. I found that's been able to help speak to entrepreneurs and to be authentic. I think similarly when you're talking to investors, because we have investors into our fund, again, who could be, billionaires, and we don't have anything in common because I'm not a billionaire and I wish I was secret billionaire. Allows you to talk about things that are really important, that are core to them. And I think when I realized that as growing up, or everyone's like, oh, Amy always likes to talk, or she's always talking to someone, and X, Y, and Z. But I think it allows me to be comfortable in different situations. And I don't want to say I don't have fear for things, because I definitely do, but it allows you to be a bit more comfortable with the unknown, because there's always commonalities, there's always common ground, and that's been part of my lived experience, and it translates into a lot of parts of my work, which I've been able to lean on very heavily. So yeah, when I meant kind of lean into your strengths, not to be so, literal about it, but really just thinking more broadly about some of the key things that you're good at, and not taking those for granted, and figuring out new ways that they could be assets to you.
Oh, those are great words to end on. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much, Amy, for your time, for your insights, for all the work you're doing, all the leadership that you guys are doing at Prime. And I hope we can have you back at some time in the future. I think there would be great interest in hearing from you again. And thanks to all our participants. We had a great turnout, wonderful questions. I'm sorry that we could not get to all of them. And just to conclude, I want to thank again our sponsors, our wonderful annual event sponsors who make this work possible: Eversource, First Light, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and Robinson & Cole. And don't forget to sign up for that September 9th event that's coming up. And if you missed any of the sessions, they're on the YouTube channel for NEWIEE. They're fantastic to watch after the fact. And if you're not a member, I'd love to have you become a member, support our work, become part of the community, and lean into your strength, like Amy said. So thank you again, and have a good night.
Thanks for having me, Paulina. I had a lot of fun. This was great.
Thanks.
Bye.